to build some sort of groundwork for this, within the European Union, there are the three major institutions, and all these institutions have quite different approaches to how media should be regulated in general. On the one hand, the European Council, which is maybe the most powerful institution within the EU, that is the national governments taken together. They always think the EU rules too much into their individual policies. The EU takes precedence over national law, and thus the EU must be brought back to the very essentials, to the bare essentials that are needed, and they are very keen on the sovereignty of all the member states, so that each country can pursue, of course, its own vital interests as strongly as possible. On the other hand, there's the European Parliament, which is, of course, elected by the European people, and which is rather diverse in its composition. And as a consequence, the Parliament also likes very much diversity and pluralism in content. They don't care that much about the business side of things, for example, but they rather regulate the media, if necessary, in order to ensure that all the languages are present, that there's a lot of exchange between the different European countries and cultures in terms of audiovisual products, of books, of news, and such things. Finally, there's the European Commission, and the Commission just watches everything out of the perspective of the EU as a whole. And some say the European Commission is, well, the quintessential institution of market liberalism, so to speak. That is, the Commission thinks the most important thing about media regulation is that there's a free market. That, and if there's a lot of regulation needed to ensure that not one competitor takes precedence over the others, well, let there be regulation. So you see, there are already, at the start of the discussion, there are three different and diverging positions on how media should be regulated. So what innovation means in this context is, on the one hand, of course, to find a way to sort of reconcile these different approaches with each other, so that the institutions are no longer at different opinions about this topic, but can pull together on one common string. And on the other hand, of course, to address the current problems that are coming up inside the European Union. So if we look at a few of these current challenges we face in the media regulation. On the one hand, this duality of globalization and digitalization, of course. Globalization in this case means two things. On the one hand, it means that international companies, mostly the hedge funds and private equity enterprises, they gain more and more influence over national media, where some 20 or 30 years ago, most of the national media, at least in the Western European countries, were owned by people from these countries. Now this is quite different. There have been built multinational media conglomerates, which are, of course, in their business interests, somewhat different from what the individual country might need in terms of, for example, news coverage or content, like in movies or series and things like that. And additionally, of course, the digitalization, which is really closely intertwined with the globalization, means that the boundaries between the countries, between the different regulatory systems, are sort of dissoluted. They don't work any longer. On the other side of this medal, we have the connection between the EU common market and with the concentration of media companies. The problem in the EU, for example, is that the countries that have acceded last to the EU sometimes are not that highly developed media markets as the Western European states, but through the European legislation they are being forced to set market mechanisms in force that are used throughout Western Europe. That is, basically open their borders and open their media markets to the influence of foreign companies. And this is a phenomenon that is in Europe very much growing in the last couple of years because there are a lot of rules in each member country that prohibits people from owning, say, television stations and a newspaper, or prevents them from owning more than one or two television stations or more than one and two newspapers. So what is happening in the US, that media companies integrate vertically, that a company like News Corporation owns production studios, television networks, publishing houses, newspapers, internet sites, and so on. That's not possible in Germany or in France, wherever there are antitrust regulations in place. So what European media companies do, they expand into neighboring countries. So the people who are operating the biggest newspaper chains in Germany, they are starting to operate also newspapers in all over Eastern Europe, or in all markets where they have still some way of accessing the market, or they are buying up television stations across Europe and so on, so that we have a sort of horizontal integration throughout the European Union, which is not the least caused by the rules that prohibit companies from growing inside their own country. I have a recent example for this. I suppose a lot of you know that already, which is, well, exemplary for that discussion. ProSiebenSat.1 is one of the two very big and very influential German private television groups. They have 4 channels and 2 major channels in their portfolio. And well, they were up for sale because their original owner, which was Leo Kirch, went bankrupt in, I think it was 2000. And there was very strong interest to buy ProSiebenSat.1 Group by the publishing group Springer, which is the publisher of the most important German tabloid newspaper Bild-Zeitung, and a publisher also of really a lot of other print products, among them most prominently television guides, print television guides. So Springer is a company that is interested in publishing, in doing journalism, basically, also of course very much in making money, but it's still a company that has its roots very much in the journalistic profession. So they wanted to buy a television stations group, but they couldn't. German media law, German media regulation, and the regulation authorities, they stopped them. They said, no, somebody who already owns the most important tabloid newspaper in Germany, and somebody who owns the television guide magazines, this company must not be influential in private television as well, because they could, on the one hand, get a one-sided opinion out in the population. That is, they use both the Bild-Zeitung and their television stations to propagate the same type of news, the same type of opinion. And on the other hand, they said it's also a distortion of competition in Germany. That means as soon as the biggest tabloid paper and one of the 2 big television